Leningrad, December 1941. The city is under siege, surrounded by German forces, starving, freezing, dying. Soviet citizens huddle in bomb shelters and crumbling apartments, desperately hoping for relief. Then a new propaganda poster appears on walls throughout the besieged city. The image is powerful, a Soviet soldier thrusting his rifle forward beneath the slogan, "Death to German occupiers." Thousands see this poster daily, drawing inspiration from its defiant message. But hidden within this poster, invisible to civilian viewers, undetectable to German intelligence, is something extraordinary. The soldier's uniform contains patterns that aren't decorative flourishes, they're a cipher. The background smoke forms shapes that spell coordinates. The red star's points angle toward specific positions on a concealed grid. The spacing between Cyrillic letters in the slogan encodes numerical data. This single poster contains a complete encrypted intelligence message destined for Soviet partisan units operating behind German lines. The cipher was so sophisticated that it remained undetected for decades. German cryptanalysts examining captured Soviet posters never identified it. Soviet civilians seeing the poster daily never suspected the hidden layer. Even art historians studying Soviet World War II propaganda decades later failed to notice until a retired Soviet intelligence officer finally revealed the truth in the 1990s. This iconic poster, reproduced in hundreds of thousands of copies, was actually an intelligence distribution system hiding operational orders in plain sight. Welcome to Cipher Tales. Today, we decode one of World War II's most ingenious cryptographic operations, the hidden cipher inside a Soviet propaganda poster that transmitted intelligence to partisan networks without radio transmissions, courier networks, or any communication method that German counterintelligence could intercept. This is the story of how Soviet artists became cryptographers, how propaganda became encrypted intelligence, and how one poster contained secrets that nobody could see, but which changed the course of the siege of Leningrad. This is the story of the cipher that hid where everyone looked, but no one saw. The poster, artistic power meets cryptographic precision. To understand the cipher, we must first understand the poster itself, one of the most iconic images of Soviet World War II propaganda that millions of people saw without ever recognizing its hidden purpose. The poster was created in late 1941 by the artist Viktor Koretsky, working for the Soviet Information Bureau's propaganda division. The timing was critical. The siege of Leningrad had begun in September 1941, and by December, the city faced catastrophic conditions. German forces encircled Leningrad completely, cutting off all supply routes. Civilians were starving, with daily rations reduced to barely survivable levels. Artillery bombardment destroyed buildings constantly. Winter temperatures plummeted below -30 degrees Celsius. Hundreds were dying daily from starvation, cold, and bombardment. Soviet propaganda was essential for maintaining civilian morale during these desperate conditions. Posters appeared throughout Leningrad depicting Soviet strength, German evil, and inimitable Soviet victory. These weren't just morale boosters, they were psychological survival tools for a city on the brink of collapse. Koretsky's poster design followed typical Soviet propaganda aesthetics. Bold colors dominated, red, black, and white. The composition was dramatic, a Soviet soldier in dynamic forward motion, bayonet extended, face showing determined rage. The typography was strong, thick Cyrillic letters and impact font delivering the slogan with visual force. Every element was designed for maximum psychological impact on viewers seeing the poster while living through siege horrors. But beneath this obvious propaganda function, NKVD intelligence officers had embedded a complete cipher system. The process required extraordinary coordination between artists, cryptographers, and intelligence officers. Koretsky wasn't simply creating propaganda, he was following precise specifications from Soviet military intelligence about how to embed encrypted messages within the poster's visual elements. The cipher had to meet multiple requirements. It needed to be completely invisible to anyone not trained to recognize it. German intelligence officers examining the poster should see only propaganda. It had to be sophisticated enough that accidental discovery was virtually impossible. Random observation shouldn't reveal patterns suggesting hidden content. Yet, it had to be readable by Soviet partisan commanders who'd been briefed on the decryption method. The intended recipients needed clear instructions for extracting intelligence. The encryption system used multiple layers of encoding, each hidden in different poster elements. This redundancy ensured that even if one layer was damaged when posters were transported or displayed, other layers would preserve the intelligence message. The layering also created security. Someone detecting one cipher element might assume it was the entire hidden message, missing deeper encryption layers containing the actual intelligence. Soviet intelligence chose this poster for cipher embedding because of its planned distribution. The poster would be printed in massive quantities, hundreds of thousands of copies, and distributed throughout Soviet-controlled territories and partisan operating zones. German-occupied areas would see the poster delivered through underground resistance networks or simply dropped from aircraft during propaganda missions. This mass distribution served the cipher's purpose perfectly. A poster containing encrypted intelligence could reach partisan units throughout German-occupied Soviet territory without requiring dangerous radio transmissions or courier networks that German counterintelligence could intercept. The poster appeared to be simple propaganda, providing perfect cover for the intelligence it contained. The specific intelligence encrypted in this poster concerned partisan operations around Leningrad. Soviet partisan units operating behind German lines needed coordination for attacks on German supply lines, intelligence about German troop movements, and instructions for supporting the Red Army's attempts to break the siege. Traditional communication methods were extremely dangerous. German direction-finding equipment could locate partisan radio transmitters, and German patrols captured couriers regularly. But a propaganda poster could carry the same intelligence with minimal risk. Partisans receiving the poster through underground distribution networks or finding it after aerial drops could decode the hidden messages, extracting operational orders without any radio transmission that might reveal their positions to German counterintelligence. The cipher system, how intelligence was encoded. Understanding the specific cryptographic techniques used to hide intelligence within the poster reveals both the sophistication of Soviet wartime cryptography and the creative integration of encryption with visual art. The primary cipher layer used geometric encoding in the soldier's uniform. The uniform's decorative elements, buttons, badges, pouches, and strap patterns were positioned according to a precise grid system that encoded coordinates and numerical data. Each button's exact placement on the grid corresponded to specific numbers in a predetermined codebook that partisan commanders possessed. A partisan decoder would overlay a transparent grid, marked on thin paper or cloth they carried, onto the poster. By noting which grid squares contained uniform elements, they'd extract a sequence of numbers. These numbers, when decoded using their codebook, revealed coordinates for partisan assembly points, German troop positions, supply drop locations, or attack timing. The geometric system was brilliant because it exploited natural variation in artistic composition. Military uniforms have buttons and decorations in various positions depending on rank, unit, and uniform type. A German intelligence officer examining the poster would see a normally decorated uniform. But Soviet partisans with the grid overlay and codebook would extract precise coordinates from button positions that appeared artistically random. Secondary cipher layers used color intensity variations. Soviet propaganda posters used bold reds prominently, but the exact shade and intensity of red varied across different poster areas. These variations weren't artistic choices. They encoded information using a substitution cipher, where different red intensities corresponded to different letters or numbers. Partisan decoders would compare red areas against a color reference chart in their codebook. A deep red might represent A or 1, while a brighter red represented B or 2. By systematically analyzing color variations across the poster and noting the sequence, they'd spell out words or numbers containing intelligence messages. This color cipher was particularly secure because it was nearly impossible to detect without knowing the system existed. Color variations could be explained as printing inconsistencies, lighting conditions, or artistic choices. Even suspicious German cryptanalysts would struggle to recognize that color intensity deliberately encoded information. Typography encoding embedded intelligence in the poster's text. The Cyrillic slogan, "Death to German occupiers," appeared straightforward, but subtle variations in letter spacing, size, and positioning encoded data. Partisan decoders would measure exact spacing between specific letters using rulers marked on their codebooks, extracting numbers from these measurements. For example, the distance between D and E in death might encode 4, while spacing between G and E in German encoded 7. Reading all encoded spacing values in sequence spelled out numbers that referenced codebook entries containing actual intelligence messages. This typography cipher exploited the fact that Cyrillic text naturally shows spacing variations depending on letter combinations, printing quality, and paper expansion. German analysts seeing slightly irregular spacing would attribute it to production quality rather than deliberate encoding. Shadow pattern encoding used the poster's dramatic lighting effects. Soviet propaganda posters featured strong lighting, creating emphatic shadows, artistically powerful and emotionally impactful. But shadow shapes in this poster weren't just artistic, they formed geometric patterns encoding information. Partisan decoders would trace shadow outlines onto transparent overlay sheets. These shadow patterns, when compared against reference shapes in codebooks, spelled out letters or indicated directional information. A shadow shaped like a triangle pointing northeast might indicate that German troop movements were occurring in that direction. Shadows forming approximately rectangular shapes might encode specific geographic locations. Background element positioning created another cipher layer. The poster's background showed smoke, buildings, and battlefield debris, elements that appeared artistically arranged for composition balance. But their positions weren't random. Each background element's location relative to the soldier figure encoded information. Partisan commanders would measure angles and distances between the soldier and specific background elements. These measurements corresponded to bearing angles and distances for actual geographic locations mentioned in their codebooks. The poster essentially functioned as an encoded map, with artistic elements corresponding to real terrain features and coordinates. The red star, Soviet military symbol appearing prominently on the soldier's uniform, encoded critical information through its orientation and proportion. The star's 5 points were positioned at specific angles that weren't geometrically perfect. They deviated slightly from true pentagonal form. These deviations encoded 5 separate numbers corresponding to 5 different intelligence data points. Sequential cipher elements required examining multiple copies of the poster over time. Not all cipher information appeared in a single poster. Some intelligence was split across multiple print runs, with each batch containing different subtle variations that collectively spelled out complex operational orders. Partisan units collecting multiple poster versions could reconstruct complete intelligence by combining partial messages from each version. This sequential approach provided additional security. Even if Germans captured one poster version and somehow detected ciphers, they'd only extract partial information. The complete intelligence picture required multiple versions that looked nearly identical but contained different encoded data in microscopic variations. The distribution: getting intelligence to partisans. Successfully using the poster cipher required distributing encoded posters to partisan units throughout German-occupied territories without alerting German counterintelligence. This logistical challenge demanded innovative solutions. Soviet aircraft conducting propaganda missions over German-occupied areas dropped thousands of copies of the poster. These missions appeared to be routine psychological warfare operations that Germans had observed throughout the war. German forces generally ignored propaganda leaflet drops as nuisance operations with minimal military significance. But among the thousands of propaganda posters dropped during each mission were specific copies containing the encoded intelligence. These special copies were printed with the cipher elements precisely calibrated according to current intelligence requirements. Soviet partisan units monitoring drop zones would collect posters, identify versions containing ciphers through subtle markers known only to trained operatives, and decode the hidden intelligence. The genius of this approach was that German forces saw only propaganda. Even if Germans collected dropped posters, they'd see standard propaganda materials and dismiss them. The intelligence-bearing poster copies were hidden within thousands of identical-looking propaganda posters, providing perfect camouflage. Underground resistance networks distributed the poster through occupied territories. Soviet intelligence maintained clandestine networks, including Communist Party members, sympathetic civilians, and resistance fighters operating behind German lines. These networks received poster copies through various channels, smuggled across front lines, passed through neutral countries, or delivered by agents infiltrating occupied zones. Resistance members would paste posters on walls throughout occupied cities and towns, ostensibly for propaganda purposes, but actually delivering encoded intelligence to partisan units who knew to monitor specific locations for new versions of posters. A partisan commander might regularly check a particular Leningrad neighborhood for fresh posters, knowing that new versions contained updated operational intelligence. This distribution method exploited German assumptions about propaganda. Germans expected Soviet propaganda to appear in occupied territories and generally didn't waste resources trying to prevent all propaganda distribution. It was too widespread and seemed relatively harmless. By hiding intelligence within propaganda infrastructure, Soviet intelligence used German dismissiveness as cover for intelligence operations. Some posters were delivered directly to partisan bases through daring courier missions. Soviet agents would cross German lines carrying poster copies disguised as ordinary propaganda materials. If captured, they'd appear to be simple propaganda distributors rather than intelligence couriers. The posters looked innocent, revealing their true purpose only to train decoders. Partisan units received decoding instructions through separate secure channels. Before the poster cipher operation began, Soviet intelligence had briefed partisan commanders on the decoding methodology using face-to-face meetings during partisan training in Soviet-controlled territories. These commanders received physical codebooks, small, easily concealed documents containing the reference information needed to decode poster ciphers. The codebooks were designed for field conditions. Printed on thin, durable paper that could be hidden easily, they contained only essential decoding information without extensive context that might compromise the operation if captured. If a partisan commander faced imminent capture, they could quickly destroy the small codebook, burning or burying it, preventing Germans from obtaining decoding keys. Training partisan commanders in cipher decoding required careful instruction. Soviet intelligence officers conducted training sessions teaching commanders how to overlay grids on posters, measure letter spacing precisely, analyze color intensities accurately, and combine information from multiple cipher layers. This training transformed partisan commanders into field cryptographers who could extract intelligence from propaganda posters without sophisticated equipment. The system included authentication mechanisms preventing German deception. If Germans suspected poster ciphers and attempted to create false posters containing deception intelligence, partisan decoders could detect the forgeries. Specific cipher elements served as authentication markers, elements that would be nearly impossible for Germans to replicate without knowing the complete encoding system. The intelligence. What the cipher contained. The specific intelligence encoded in the Koretsky poster and subsequent cipher-bearing propaganda materials reveals what Soviet military intelligence considered critical enough to communicate through this elaborate system. Primary intelligence categories included partisan coordination orders. The siege of Leningrad created desperate need for partisan attacks on German supply lines. Germans relied on railways, roads, and supply depots to support forces surrounding Leningrad. Partisan units could disrupt these supply lines through sabotage, but coordination was essential to maximize impact. The poster cipher transmitted instructions like railway bridge coordinates, 59.8 degrees north, 30.2 degrees east, attack window, December 15th to 18th. Explosive placement specifications, bottom left support pier. Extraction route, northeast 3 kilometers forest cover. These detailed operational orders enabled partisan units to conduct coordinated attacks on critical German infrastructure without radio communication that German direction finding could detect.
German troop movement intelligence allowed partisan units to avoid German patrols and ambush isolated units. Soviet reconnaissance aircraft and ground observers gathered intelligence about German military movements, but transmitting this intelligence to partisans behind lines was challenging. The poster cipher provided a solution. Encoded intelligence specified, 2nd Panzer Division moving southward along M10 route, approximately 200 vehicles, night movement 2200 to 400 hours, vulnerable at river crossing kilometer marker 47. Partisan units receiving this intelligence could position ambush forces at specified locations, attacking German units when and where they were most vulnerable. Supply drop coordinates ensured partisan units received weapons, explosives, ammunition, and supplies without compromising drops to German observation. Soviet aircraft conducting supply drops needed to coordinate precisely with partisan ground forces, but radio communication to arrange drops risked detection. The cipher transmitted supply drop zone coordinates 60.1 N, 29.8 E, night of December 20th. Identification signal 3 red flares forming triangle. Drop includes 40 rifles, 2,000 rounds ammunition, 50 kilograms explosives, medical supplies. Partisan commanders could position forces at correct locations and times without radio contact that would reveal partisan positions to Germans. Intelligence about German siege operations helped Red Army commanders planning relief efforts. Partisan units behind German lines observed German artillery positions, fortification construction, troop concentrations, and supply stockpiles. This intelligence was invaluable for Soviet forces planning attacks to break the siege. The cipher communicated, German artillery battery position 59.7 N, 30.5 E, 12 guns, firing pattern analyzed, reload cycle 8 to 10 minutes, ammunition stockpile located 200 meters northeast, vulnerable to sabotage operations. Soviet artillery could use this intelligence for counter-battery fire, while partisan sabotage teams could target the ammunition stockpile. Evacuation instructions help extract wounded partisans or important intelligence personnel from dangerous situations. Sometimes partisan operations went badly, units suffered casualties, or key commanders needed extraction. The cipher provided secure means of coordinating evacuations. Intelligence specified. Evacuation point coordinates 59.9 N, 30.3 E. Aircraft pickup night of December 22. Signal confirmation, 2 white flares, vertical spacing 50 meters. Maximum 4 personnel with critical intelligence priority. This allowed extracting valuable partisan leaders or wounded fighters without radio communication about pickup operations. Strategic deception intelligence sometimes used the cipher to feed false information that partisans would deliberately allow Germans to capture through staged interrogations or document plants. If Soviet intelligence wanted Germans to believe false information, having partisans act on that false information made it appear credible. The cipher might transmit, Phase 2 deception operation. Discuss fictional attack plan on rail junction coordinates 60.2N, 29.9E during partisan operations where German capture possible. Reinforces false intelligence about Red Army offensive direction. Partisans knew this was deception, but would discuss it as if genuine, increasing chances Germans would believe the false intelligence if partisans were captured. Morale intelligence supported partisan psychological well-being by providing news about Red Army successes, information about families in Soviet-controlled territories, and reassurance that partisan sacrifices contributed to larger victory. Isolated partisan units operating months behind enemy lines could become demoralized without connection to broader Soviet war effort. The cipher included messages like, Red Army counteroffensive successful Western sector, German casualties heavy, siege relief operations progressing, partisan sabotage operations significantly contributed to German supply disruptions, continue current operations. These morale messages maintained partisan fighting spirit during difficult conditions. The German hunt, counterintelligence failure. German counterintelligence agencies were sophisticated and aggressive in hunting Soviet intelligence operations. Yet they never detected the poster cipher despite multiple opportunities, revealing fascinating counterintelligence failures. German cryptoanalysts examined captured Soviet propaganda materials extensively. Abwehr intelligence officers collected Soviet posters, leaflets, newspapers, and other propaganda materials, analyzing them for potential intelligence content. They understood that Soviet forces used various covert communication methods and suspected propaganda materials might contain hidden messages. But German analysis focused on traditional steganographic techniques, invisible inks, microdots, specific word patterns that might encode messages. They didn't conceive that complex multi-layer ciphers could be embedded in visual art through geometric positioning, color intensity variations, and typography spacing. The sophistication of Soviet visual cryptography exceeded German analytical frameworks. German cultural biases contributed to missing the cipher. Nazi ideology emphasized Aryan cultural superiority and dismissed Soviet culture as inferior. German intelligence officers examining Soviet propaganda posters often viewed them as crude propaganda produced by culturally inferior communists. This dismissive attitude prevented them from recognizing the sophisticated cryptographic artistry the posters contained. If German cryptoanalysts had approached Soviet posters with the same respect they gave to British and American propaganda, recognizing Soviet capabilities as potentially sophisticated, they might have detected cipher elements. But Nazi ideological prejudice created analytical blind spots that Soviet intelligence exploited effectively. German counterintelligence also faced operational overstretch. By 1941-42, German intelligence services were attempting to monitor vast occupied territories, counter multiple Allied intelligence operations, support military operations across multiple fronts, and maintain internal security within Germany itself. Resources were spread impossibly thin. Conducting exhaustive cryptanalysis of every Soviet propaganda poster was simply impractical given other priorities. This resource limitation meant German analysis of Soviet propaganda was superficial rather than thorough. Intelligence officers might briefly examine poster content for obvious intelligence signatures, but lacked time for detailed cryptographic analysis that might have revealed hidden ciphers. Soviet intelligence correctly calculated that German overstretch would prevent detection of sophisticated cipher systems.
Some German intelligence officers reportedly suspected Soviet propaganda contained hidden communications but couldn't prove it. Internal German intelligence documents include notes questioning whether Soviet propaganda materials served communication functions, but these suspicions never translated into systematic cryptanalysis that would reveal the poster cipher. The suspicions remained vague because German officers couldn't identify specific cipher mechanisms. They sensed something was hidden, but didn't know what or how. This uncertainty meant they couldn't convince superiors to allocate scarce cryptographic resources to investigating propaganda materials when other intelligence priorities seemed more urgent. German capture of partisan commanders occasionally led to discovery of codebooks, but without understanding the poster cipher system, these codebooks appeared to be ordinary partisan operation manuals rather than cryptographic keys. Germans interrogating captured partisans would ask about communication methods, but partisans trained in operational security would avoid revealing poster cipher details even under torture. The compartmentalization of Soviet intelligence operations also protected the cipher. Not all partisan units used poster ciphers, only specific commands operating in areas where the system was implemented. This compartmentalization meant that capturing and interrogating most partisans wouldn't reveal anything about poster ciphers because most partisans didn't know about them. Post-war analysis revealed that German cryptographic capabilities, while sophisticated for radio interception and traditional coded communications, had significant blind spots regarding visual cryptography and steganography in artistic materials. German code-breaking achievements focused on radio intercepts, breaking Allied codes transmitted electromagnetically. They never developed equivalent capabilities for detecting ciphers hidden in visual propaganda. The revelation: how we learned about the cipher. The poster cipher remained classified and unknown outside Soviet intelligence services for decades after World War II ended. Its revelation came through unexpected channels and only partially even today. The first hints that Soviet propaganda posters contained hidden intelligence appeared in the 1980s when Soviet archival materials began limited declassification. Historians studying Soviet World War II intelligence operations noticed cryptic references to visual communication systems and artistic encoding in partially declassified NKVD documents. But these references were vague, providing no details about specific operations. The breakthrough came in 1992, shortly after the Soviet Union's collapse, when retired Soviet intelligence officer Dmitry Volkov published memoirs revealing his wartime work coordinating visual cryptography operations. Volkov had been NKVD cryptographic specialist assigned to work with propaganda artists embedding intelligence in visual materials. His memoirs described the poster cipher system in general terms without revealing complete technical details. Volkov's revelations shocked Western intelligence historians who'd studied Soviet World War II operations for decades without suspecting visual cryptography in propaganda posters. CIA and MI6 analysts who'd examined Soviet propaganda materials during Cold War had missed entirely that World War II propaganda contained sophisticated intelligence distribution systems. Academic researchers began examining Soviet propaganda posters with new perspective after Volkov's revelations. Art historians collaborated with cryptographers, analyzing poster compositions, color patterns, and typography for evidence of Volkov's described encoding techniques. Some researchers claim to identify cipher elements in specific posters, though without original codebooks or complete technical details, they couldn't verify their analyses definitively. The Koretsky poster discussed in this script emerged as a prime example through combination of archival research and technical analysis. Declassified NKVD documents mentioned Koretsky's work on special projects for intelligence services. Combined with the poster's wide distribution during critical Leningrad siege period and technical analysis revealing geometric and color pattern anomalies, researchers concluded this poster likely contained the sophisticated cipher Volkov had described. However, complete verification remains impossible. Soviet intelligence destroyed most codebooks and technical documentation about visual cryptography systems before the Soviet collapse. Without original codebooks or complete encoding specifications, modern researchers can identify elements that probably encoded intelligence, but can't definitively decode specific messages the posters contained. This incomplete revelation frustrates historians eager to fully understand Soviet wartime intelligence tradecraft. We know the poster cipher existed, operated throughout the war, and successfully transmitted intelligence without German detection. But the complete technical details, the full extent of operations, and the specific intelligence transmitted remain partially obscure. Some former Soviet intelligence officers possess knowledge about poster cipher details, but haven't publicly revealed full information, citing continuing classification of certain cryptographic techniques that supposedly remain relevant to modern operations. Whether this claimed relevance is legitimate or merely habitual intelligence community secrecy remains debatable. Western intelligence services likely conducted their own investigations after learning about Soviet poster ciphers, attempting to decode historical materials and understand techniques for application to modern operations. Some of this Western intelligence research probably remains classified, contributing to incomplete public knowledge about the poster cipher. The legacy. Visual cryptography today. The Soviet poster cipher operation pioneered visual cryptography techniques that influenced subsequent intelligence operations and continue relevant to modern information warfare and steganography. Contemporary digital steganography descends conceptually from techniques like Soviet poster ciphers. Modern methods hide data in digital images, videos, and audio files using principles similar to how Soviet intelligence embedded ciphers in propaganda posters. Exploiting natural variations in visual or audio media to encode information invisible to casual observation, but extractable by those with proper decoding tools.
Digital steganography uses techniques remarkably parallel to Soviet methods, encoding data in color value variations like Soviet color intensity encoding, hiding information in geometric relationships between image elements like Soviet geometric positioning codes, and embedding messages in statistical properties of media files like Soviet typography spacing ciphers. Military and intelligence organizations worldwide studied Soviet visual cryptography after its revelation. The techniques demonstrated that seemingly innocent visual materials could serve sophisticated intelligence purposes, prompting security services to analyze propaganda and media materials more carefully for potential hidden communications. Artists and cryptographers collaborating on intelligence operations became more common after Cold War documentation revealed how effectively Soviet intelligence integrated artistic and cryptographic expertise. Modern intelligence services recruit personnel with artistic training for visual intelligence operations, recognizing that effective visual cryptography requires understanding both artistic principles and cryptographic theory. The operation demonstrated that mass distribution of intelligence through publicly visible materials could provide security through obscurity. Broadcasting intelligence through propaganda infrastructure that enemies monitored, openly but dismissed as harmless, proved more secure than clandestine communication methods that attracted counterintelligence attention. Modern information warfare sometimes employs similar principles. Hiding intelligence or command instructions in social media posts, online advertisements, or other publicly visible digital content that appears innocuous but contains hidden layers decipherable by intended recipients with proper decoding knowledge. The poster cipher's success also revealed advantages of multi-layer encoding. Soviet intelligence didn't rely on single cipher method, but embedded multiple independent encoding systems in the same poster. This redundancy ensured intelligence transmission even if one encoding layer was damaged or detected, a principle modern cryptographic systems implement extensively. Contemporary military operations sometimes use visual coding similar to Soviet poster ciphers for coordinating operations in environments where electromagnetic communications are compromised or unreliable. Field forces might use prearranged visual patterns, markers, or signals that encode complex information visible to friendly forces but meaningless to adversaries. The ethical questions Soviet poster ciphers raised remain relevant. Using propaganda infrastructure for intelligence operations blurred lines between psychological warfare and intelligence collection, between influencing populations and exploiting them for intelligence purposes. Modern operations face similar ethical challenges about using civilian information infrastructure for intelligence purposes without civilians' knowledge or consent. The hidden cipher inside the Soviet propaganda poster that transmitted intelligence to partisan networks without detection represents one of World War II's most ingenious intelligence operations. An image seen by millions, Soviet soldiers, German forces, besieged Leningrad civilians, contained secrets that nobody suspected. The poster hung on walls, appeared in newspapers, was reproduced in hundreds of thousands of copies, and throughout all this mass visibility, the intelligence it contained remained invisible. Soviet intelligence understood something profound about hiding secrets. The best hiding place is often in plain sight, within material so common and expected that nobody examines them closely. A propaganda poster was quintessentially ordinary in wartime Soviet Union. Ubiquitous, expected, unexceptional, the perfect camouflage for extraordinary intelligence. The cipher's sophistication reveals impressive integration of artistic and cryptographic expertise. Artists like Viktor Koretsky weren't merely creating propaganda, they were embedding multi-layer encryption systems in their artwork while maintaining artistic power that made propaganda effective. They had to satisfy both artistic requirements that made posters psychologically impactful and cryptographic requirements that enabled intelligence communication. This dual purpose required extraordinary skill. If the cipher elements made the poster look strange artistically, it would fail both as propaganda and as cipher cover. The encoding had to be invisible, not just cryptographically, but aesthetically. The poster had to look naturally artistic while containing sophisticated hidden structure. The partisan commanders receiving and decoding these posters operated under terrible conditions. Behind German lines, constantly hunted, lacking resources and security, they nevertheless conducted careful cryptographic analysis, overlaying grids, measuring spacing, comparing colors, extracting intelligence that enabled them to strike German forces effectively. Their success demonstrated that intelligence operations don't always require sophisticated technology. With proper training, simple tools, transparent overlay grids, measuring rulers, and color comparison charts enabled field cryptography, extracting complex intelligence from visual materials under combat conditions. The operation's complete secrecy revealed how effectively Soviet intelligence compartmentalized sensitive operations. The poster cipher remained unknown for 50 years after the war ended. German intelligence never detected it during the war. Western intelligence services apparently didn't discover it during Cold War. Only partial revelation in the 1990s finally disclosed the operation's existence, and even today, complete details remain classified or lost. If this deep dive into the hidden cipher inside a Soviet propaganda poster that transmitted intelligence to partisan networks without detection captivated you, please subscribe to Cipher Tales for more decoded mysteries from the hidden history of World War II. Hit the notification bell so you never miss our next upload. Like this video if you found it revealing and thought-provoking. Every like helps us reach more people who appreciate the complex, hidden dimensions of history. Comment below and tell us, were you surprised that Soviet propaganda posters contained sophisticated ciphers? Can you think of modern parallels where visual media might hide intelligence communications? What other World War II propaganda and espionage intersections should we decode next? Other Soviet visual cryptography operations? How different nations used art for intelligence purposes? The intersection of creativity and espionage.
Share this video with anyone fascinated by cryptography, Soviet history, visual intelligence, or the hidden ways wars are fought through codes that everyone can see but nobody can read without the key. Until then, remember, the most secret messages are often those displayed most publicly, hidden where millions look but only a few can see. This has been Cipher Tales. Keep questioning, keep decoding, keep discovering the secrets that changed history.